This year's MVP race is getting into historically significant territory. So today was an obvious gut check game for what's been a tight race, in my opinion, between SGA and Jokic. And I think up to this point in the season, they've matched up about 3 times. And so far, OKC's had the upper hand, going 2 for 1 as of today. And that could change. As I'm recording this video, they're set to match up again tomorrow night. So we could end up seeing a tied up season series. But still, today served as a perfect measuring stick for the race so far. And man, if you've been paying attention to things over the last few weeks, making that decision for MVP between Jokic and SGA has not been an easy task. Jokic is literally coming off of arguably the greatest regular season performance from a big man with his 30, 20, and 20 game against the Suns. That has to be the most impressive individual stat line in the modern era, and the thing that I love about it is that none of it felt forced. What makes Jokic so impressive is that everything comes within the flow of the offense. There is a reason why Denver's offense is arguably the best in the league when things run through him. And then we have games like today where SGA and Jokic match up head to head, and SGA has the upper hand with a 40-point effort. And if we look at SGA's season, he's got a multitude of 50-point games and also a legitimate argument for all defense, and OKC has been the best team in the NBA. These things have made the MVP discussion a tough one to navigate, and it's been extremely difficult just trying to make a selection between the two. On one hand, SGA is having a ridiculous individual and team season, while Jokic is the best player in the league, playing at his literal peak. The narrative and maybe voter fatigue seems to be in Shai's favor, but still, even with that, it's crazy to not give the MVP to the best player in the league in his best season. That's the best way I can articulate why this race has been so tough to navigate. It seems equally ridiculous to try to argue one guy over the other. It wouldn't feel right for one of these guys to walk away without MVP recognition. That's how good both of them have been. And I'm not here to tell you all who I think should win it or not, but I just want to put this race in perspective. Is it possibly the most competitive MVP race we've ever seen? I did some digging, so let's take a surface level view at some other MVP races throughout the course of NBA history that could end up being just as good as this one. 2017 gave us a very interesting race between James Harden and Russell Westbrook. I don't need to spend too much time explaining this one. We all know how it went down. Russ entered the season with the OKC Thunder without Kevin Durant and went on a tear, becoming the first player in league history since Oscar Robertson to average a triple-double, ending a drought for a record that a lot of people thought was unbreakable. But what Harden was doing that year was nearly as impressive. Not only was Houston good as they were the 3rd seed out in the West, but Harden was the full-time point guard for the new-look Rockets for the first time in his career and averaged 29 points and 11 assists. None of them were off the charts with their efficiency, and both were playing questionable styles of basketball at this point, but we haven't seen two guards battle it out for the award quite like this. Ultimately, Russ walked away with the award, which was the first and only one of his career. Let's go all the way back for this next one into the early 90s for the infamous 1990 race. This time I'll include 3 players, as this was a tight one between Michael Jordan, Charles Barkley, and Magic Johnson. This one is considered as the closest and the most controversial race in NBA history. For context, at this point in the league, depending on who you ask, we hadn't quite yet transferred that best player in the league title over to Michael Jordan just yet. Magic still had the crown, and despite some amazing individual performances from both Jordan and Barkley, Magic came out on top of the race with the award, leading the Lakers to the best record in the West and coming second in assists per game. It was the classic best player on the best team wins the award type of situation that we've seen a ton over the last few seasons. But obviously, as I said, it wasn't without its fair share of controversy and weird moments. Barkley literally had more first place votes than Magic Johnson did, but couldn't garner as many second and third place votes, and that's what made the difference. But that's how the cookie crumbled. And at this point, another reason for the race being in such limbo was because, again, there was a transfer of powers on the horizon. While Magic was still seen as the best player in the NBA, it was very apparent that players like Barkley and Jordan were right around the corner for that title. Let's get a little more controversial and take a look at the 2005 race. This was a tight one between Steve Nash and Shaq, 2 players who had just joined up on brand new teams. Here again, we have another example of that trade-off between being the best player on the best team and just flat out being a better individual player. There was no doubt that at this point, Shaq was still a top 3 player in the league, with him averaging 22 and 10 along with 2 blocks per game, doing it on a really good Miami Heat team that ultimately won a title. But Nash edged him out during the regular season. Phoenix ended with the best record in the West, and he averaged 15 points and 11 assists. And what also helped, and what I think was the tipping scale for a lot of voters, was the fact that the Suns' offensive philosophy was, at this point in time, fairly revolutionary. It was a run and gun style that we only saw in short spurts from a few teams in league history up to that point. Now, was it sustainable? Not at all, but that's a whole other conversation for a different day. But still, this one will go down as one of the most controversial decisions ever. Shaq still isn't happy about it, but as I said, once again, there's that trade-off between being the best player on the best team and just flat out being a better player. And that's not necessarily the case with this particular race between Jokic and SGA, but I mentioned those other races to put things into perspective. I do think that this race between SGA and Jokic has just as much potential to end up in the same conversations as those. And this last stretch of the season is going to be major for any one of them. I don't think we are necessarily at a point where one guy has completely overtaken the other in the conversation. There is still a ton of meat left on the bones for this race, and it still could go either way. And I'll leave off with this statement to the internet real quick, particularly NBA Twitter. This race is much closer and much more competitive than a lot of you all are trying to make it out to be. Acting as if there is no debate at this point, to me, is a complete overreaction. We can have our favorites in the conversation, but the historical implications behind this race are legitimate. Just wanted to leave that there, but as I said, it's been one of the better races that we've seen over the last few years, and we'll see how things end up turning out for both players once the season wraps up.